All right, you guys, seriously, I am going to take myself off camera because I have been having so much trouble with my internet and having appropriate bandwidth. So you guys don't get to see me, but I see you, and we'll go ahead and just get started right away. So welcome to the CSBG Organizational Standards. What we're going to talk about today is really how we did in the last review and how we're going to move forward, getting ready for next year. So, but before we begin, I really want to take a moment just to reconnect with everybody, and the heart of why we do this work. So, the promise of community action isn't just words, it's really our shared commitment. It reminds us of the values that guide our efforts every day: dignity, equity, opportunity, and really the belief that no one should ever be left behind. And whether we're in the field, in the office, in the boardroom, this promise grounds us in our mission and it unites us in our purpose. So, as a way to center ourselves and reaffirm our dedication, I'm going to read the promise out loud, and I encourage you to find ways to display or reaffirm your commitment to this work in your own agency on a regular basis. But the promise of community action changes people's lives. It embodies the spirit of hope, improves communities, and makes America a better place to live. We care about the entire community, and we are dedicated to helping people help themselves and each other. So this training today is for those who want to kind of move beyond just the regular box checking of org standards and really more align with the National Office of Community Services, which I will be referring to as OCS from here on out. Their goals are that all of us have high achieving agencies. And while standards like this are not unique to community action, these specific standards were really designed to ensure that the agencies working within the CSBG network have the capacity and resources to perform at a high level using federal taxpayer dollars. So the CSBG standards provide that foundation of organizational capacity for all eligible entities across the United States. And everybody in every agency across every county has to do this same work every year. So it's not just us. Um, we all have to do it. So I'm going to be sharing my slide deck with you guys. So all of these links that you're going to see in here, I would normally put them in the chat. However, I'm going to send this to you so you will have all of these links. These links and these resources are also available to you on the CSBG portal that the state office has put together. So there, as you went through these standards, in the in just January, you're going to see that there's a lot of opportunities for boards to take the necessary steps in order to meet all these organizational standards. So there's a link here that talks about the standards that boards are involved with and what needs to happen at any given time. There's also items that we have to have on hand or we need to gather at different times during our program years. And that calendar is the second link on this screen. And then, as I mentioned, the state CSP office also offers suggestions in their calendar of the program year. So each one it says, hey, for you quarterly board meeting people, these are some things that you should probably incorporate into your tripartite board meeting minutes so you can ensure that you have an easy way of showing your supporting documents that you've met this mission, that you've met, excuse me, these standards. There are some other links that are going to be available for you. We have self-assessments. We've got 4.3, which is, we're not going to spend any time on that today, but we do talk about that a lot in Roma. And then they also have the policy and procedure manual on the website, and then a link to some organizational standards that the National Partnership or the National Community Action Partnership shares with us. And I have all of these available for you, and these links are going to take you to where you need to go find all the right pertinent information. So before we get started, does anybody have any questions? Okay, hearing none, we're going to go ahead and get started. So in our state, we have 11 eligible entities, 11 eligible entities that are the direct uh, contractors with the state office to distribute CSBG funding, and they're broken into both private and public caps. And Wyoming's kind of unique in that sense that we have both private and public agencies. Each one of those caps, each one of our, excuse me, I just lost my train of thought with the bell going off. Each entity, whether it's public or private, operates in different ways. So some publics will do direct services, and a good example of that is Fremont County. They are a public entity, but they provide services directly. In Albany County, which I know Celeste is here, they use subrecipients as a public entity. They contract with Celeste's agency, Family Promise of Laramie or Albany County, to provide services on their behalf, and they just monitor. Some privates also have contracts that they work with people that will be able to do certain different pieces of the funding. Now, subgrantees like Celeste are typically not considered to be a community action agency, so they don't have to have a tripartite board, but they are still a really super important part of Community Action Network. And these organizational standards, while they're not required to meet these on an annual basis, again, are just a really good guideline to good managerial decisions made around your agency. So we really encourage people to take a look at these and say, if you were an eligible entity, would you be able to meet these standards? So let's talk about the standards really quick. There are three frameworks or three what we would call themes or topic lists, and that is maximum feasible participation, which includes client input, community engagement, and community assessments. Vision and direction looks at organizational leadership, board governance, strategic planning, operations and operations and accountability looks at human resources, financial, oversight, data, and analysis. So these comprehensive set of standards were developed with input through the entire CSBG network through a 3-year multi-phase process led by the Center of Excellence, which is housed at the National Partnership. And these three thematic group comprise of 9 categories. And for private entities, there are 58 standards that they must meet, and public entities have 50 standards that they're going to meet. And again, the purpose of these standards is just to ensure that all agencies have appropriate organizational capacity in really critical areas like finance and administration, and as well as areas that are unique to the mission of community action. And we're going to talk about those here in just a little bit. So why do we even care about this? It's really important for community action agencies to review these standards as benchmarks for high performance, even beyond CSBG funding, right? It doesn't have to just be CSBG funding, because there are standards that are in governance, operations, and outcomes that are critical for long-term sustainability and impact in our community. So I kind of clicked ahead too fast, but organizational resiliency and sustainability, these are the standards that really promote strong internal systems. This is where we're going to find our standards around strategic planning, financial integrity, effective leadership. We really urge you to find ways to embed these practices in your agencies, because that makes you better prepared to compete for diverse funding sources beyond CSBG, which is a really critical topic right now. Credibility and accountability, these are high standards. But what these standards do is help us build credibility with donors, partners, government agencies, and community stakeholders. And it demonstrates our alignment with a recognized performance framework that reassures all of your funders that your agency is well managed and accountable. We then have improved service. We know that these standards really help us emphasize and ensure that we're making decisions around data-informed information. It makes us use our community assessments and aroma, which helps us deliver, again, more targeted and more effective services. And agencies can really do a much better job of demonstrating our outcomes and our impact, again, making a stronger case for our support for other different types of funding. We also have strategic positioning and competitive edges that it gives us. It makes us high performing. We're seen as leaders, as innovators, and it opens doors for new partnerships, contracts, and influences in policy and regional planning efforts. And finally, why is it important? Because it's best practices. Look, the standards reflect sector-wide practices in nonprofit management and public administration. And these align with expectations of major funders like United Way, private foundations, and state and local governments. And so by using these standards as guideposts, you are really positioning yourself to be a modern, mission-driven organization that really operates with excellence, regardless of what your funding mix is. So in short, really treating organizational standards as your blueprint for excellence, not just compliance. We can check the boxes all day long, but really these encourage us and lead us down a path to excellence. And that is good for the entire network. That's good for the entire state. It's good for the region, and it's good for the country, especially in fragile times like this when our funding is at risk. These standards help us ensure that community action is impactful, that it's trusted, and it's future ready, no matter what funding source we use. So just kind of the three things that are in maximum feasible participation. Again, this is where we are going to find our customer surveys. And we're going to talk about customer surveys a little bit later today. But this is where we find our community assessment. And local control of federal CSBG resources is predicated on regular assessments that take into account our community needs, as well as our partners and our resources that are available in our community to meet these needs. So we use our assessments to assess gaps in our services. We identify resources that address community needs. It helps us develop program priorities to support the need for additional funding, and it helps us with our program evaluation. And we also do it to support our organizational strategic planning. The same is true for vision and direction. Community action leadership is exemplified at all levels across an organization, and it really starts with our mission that clarifies our work on poverty. And this is going to be true for any high-performing agency or government office. A well-functioning board, a focused chief executive officer, a well-trained and dedicated staff, as well as volunteers giving of themselves will help to help others is really going to establish your department or your agency as the cornerstone and the leverage point to address poverty across your entire community. Ensuring strong leadership, both for today and into the future, is really, really critical. So we talk about board governance. We talk about organizational leadership. Board governance, community action tripartite boards are uniquely structured to ensure maximum feasible participation by the entire community, including, and maybe even most importantly, those who the network serves. So by legislation, our tripartite boards are composed of at least 1/3 consumers who experience low income or their representatives, 1/3 of our elected officials or their appointees, and then the remainder private sector community partners. And to make this all work, we have to recruit board members thoughtfully. We have to have good partners. We have to promote opportunities for board service. We have to orient to them, train them, support them in their oversight role. Because as we go through some of these standards, you're going to see what a huge role board members play in the organizational standards. So I can't understate or overstate the establishment of our vision for community action agencies because it's huge. It's a big task, and setting that course to reach it through planning and assessments, it's a serious business. And eligible entities take on this by looking at internal functioning and the needs of the community. So we need to know that your organization, whether you're public or private, knows where it's headed, how that board and staff fit into the future, and how it's going to measure its success. And that's what really sets the tone for all of our agencies, whether they are direct services or subrecipients, and helps them guide how their services are going to be delivered and deployed as well. And then, of course, operations and accountability, because really we all know the human element of community actions work is evident everywhere. In addition to overseeing the CEO or the executive director, or maintaining strong human resources infrastructure, the key responsibilities, this is all belongs to the board oversight, and attention to organizational elements such as policies, procedures, appraisals, training, everything. These lead strong organizations to have the capacity to deliver high quality services for communities and people who are experiencing poverty. An organizational standard, for example, 7.1 sets that local government personnel policies are outside the purview of the department and tripartite board advisory boards. So this standard doesn't apply to public entities. And we're going to see a lot of those, 8 exactly, that there are some things that government offices don't have control over. And that these organizational standards take that into consideration. So there are some variances, like I said, but we'll refer back to those links that I showed in an earlier slide that talks about what those differences are. So before we go on, does anybody have any questions about what we've talked about so far? Okay, I'm not hearing anything. Is there anything in the chat? Am I missing anything in the chat? Nope. Not missing anything there. So let's go on and let's do a review of what happened this year. And in the first 2 slides, or the first 2 topics, I am really dividing these up between privates and publics and where they crushed it. So there are so many standards that the Wyoming Network, we just crushed it. The standards on this page and on the next couple of slides show where we're really doing a great job, and we're really strong in our ability to organize our agencies effectively. Partnerships, mission statements, succession planning, risk assessments, strategic planning are all things on this slide that the network as a whole does super well. And a lot of that is because the state office has made these things a part of the application process to make it easier for you to be able to show compliance in meeting these standards. So when it comes to meeting standards 6.1, 6.2, 6.3 around strategic planning, the state uses your community action plan, or the CAP, as a plan referenced in the organizational standards. It makes it easy for you. That community action plan is a plan that's specific to CSBG and is only 1 year long. So it's only your one program year long, but it is a mandated plan that shows an agency's intent on how it's going to use and deploy funding for that specific program or fiscal year only. And most agencies also have, well, almost always have, a 3 to 5 year strategic plan that also addresses other programs that might be using different or additional funding streams. Rarely do I come across an agency that only has CSBG. I always separate those 2 when I'm talking about plans, particularly in Roma. Agencies really using CSBG should have 2 plans. You should have your 1 year plan, which is your community action plan, and you should also have your long-term strategic plan. You can use both when you want to meet this standard. Now, if you do not have a functioning or relatively current strategic plan that your agency is using, reach out to me. We need to make sure that you not only know what or where your agency is going to be in the upcoming program year, you're also going to need to have long-term plans for where you want to be in 3 to 5 years, and a well-defined action plan for how you're going to get there. So where else did they crush it? Well, this talks a lot. This slide in particular is about operations and ensuring that the agency has that strong foundation of fiscal and HR policy and oversight over those things. So this is where we're going to find things like job descriptions, onboarding, orientation, performance appraisals. And these are generally things that every high performing agency has anyway. And all agencies, public and private, really did a great job here. So let's move on to publics. Where did the publics crush it? Well, there's a lot of overlap in a lot of these areas. And again, a lot of these standards that are included in the state office's application process. So just a reminder that if you're looking at ways to meet these standards, go back to your application folder next year when you're doing this in January. Upload those documents that you used just recently as your supporting documents in your application process. Those are going to meet the needs of those standards. So publics, like I mentioned earlier, are kind of unique in that they don't always have a say in what their policies and procedures might say specific to CSBG. And due to their structure, they have some limitations that private agencies don't have when it comes to these things. So a lot of times you're going to see standards say things like adherence to local government policy or complies with existing policy. You'll see things like that because some agencies just can't go and say, hey, county commissioners, I need you to go ahead and change the entire statute or mandates that you have in place. Here's another set of standards that really are an example that public entities have different standards when it comes to organizational frameworks. And this sometimes can make it difficult for public agencies, especially those who provide direct services. It's hard to be able to work within the government guardrails sometimes. I oftentimes recommend that public agencies develop their own procedures around CSBG to meet this goal. Notice I did not say policy. Policy sometimes has to go through that vetting process through legal or your county commissioners, but it's absolutely okay to have your own procedures around different things that you can do. And this allows for good guidance, and it's critical to ensure procedures are in alignment with your county policies. You cannot contradict those current policies. An example of this is one county that I work with. They specifically and intentionally do not allow for employee performance reviews as part of their county policy. So this means that this public CAA is never going to be able to meet standard 7.4. They're just never going to be able to do it. A workaround might be that there's a procedure in which the tripartite board is able to review the performance of the grant manager or the staff member who administers the grant on behalf of the board. Again, I would recommend that a procedure like that not be in direct conflict or in contradiction of the desire of the county commissioners or your county attorneys who advises that policy to be active at the county level currently. Sometimes we're just not going to be able to meet a standard through no fault of our own. Another big place where publics crushed it are the standards around board governance. Tripartite boards are really the cornerstone of community action agencies, and they figure and feature prominently in the organizational standards because they embody the core values of community action. They are our community representation. They are there to make sure we are accountable for the work that we're doing, and they make sure that we are responsive to the needs of our community. And so their importance is not just a good idea, it's really grounded in a federal requirement and in the CSBG Act. And these practical governance principles that strengthen our effectiveness and mission alignment are really common from across the United States. So one other places you tend to publics. Here's something that publics do that's a little bit different than publics. They tend to have a much more rigorous and detailed audit process and procedures that private agencies tend to not have. And primarily this is because they have bigger budgets. So they're more likely to fall under audit requirements. The biggest difficulty in meeting this standard is the timing of audits and the ability to notify the tripartite board of its findings. Later, we're going to see that some agencies and public still need help in meeting standards around the auditing processes, and we'll see that in a later slide. Now, there are some places where we improved, and I wanted to let everybody know the public entities increased scores over the previous year in 8 standards, and they maintained scores in 18 standards. Notice I'm omitting CNA standards on that because of the state's moratorium on community needs assessment. I did not include those standards in this review because they were all marked as met, regardless if we were current on our CNA schedule or not. For private entities, you guys increased scores by 10 standards over the previous year and then maintained 100% compliance in 11 of those scores. We did kind of need to maybe get some help in some of these, but the vast majority of our agencies really met these standards at a high level. But in trying to achieve an 80% compliance met rate, we need to take a look at where we can make up some ground. And in some of these cases, it's not that the agency wasn't doing the work necessary to meet the standards. It was more likely that these standards and the meeting of these standards were not reflected in board minutes or in ways that could be used as proof of meeting the standard. In a few cases, nothing was even uploaded to the folders, and I wasn't able to tell if the work was being done or not. Another common issue that we had was that the documentation used to meet the standards was out of the accepted timeframes that the state office indicated. So for next year, just keep in mind you're going to be collecting your documentation that started February 1st, 2025 to January 30th, 2026. So for those items that are done annually, these documents have to be within that time frame or we're not going to be able to mark those as met. And then we kind of lost some ground in some places. We saw these standards see us go backward. Privates decreased 16 standards, publics decreased over 6 standards. Now, this lost ground is likely most due to the way or the process in which the standards were assessed this year, as opposed to previous years. So just as a kind of brief reminder, CSNO was contracted by the state office to do a preliminary review of the organizational standards prior to the state reviewing them. And as part of that contract, it was conveyed to the state association or CSNO that the expectation from the state office was a minimum of 80% compliance to organizational standards per entity, not per network. It was also the intent of the state association to evaluate standard adherence in a very tough, critical eye, just so we could err on the side of overcompliance to the standards. My thinking was that if the agency met the standard according to the highest expectations set by the Centers of Excellence, then there was going to be plenty of room for movement should the states evaluate a little differently than I did. So after my review, then each agency then had the opportunity to go back and fix or document standards themselves in ways that allowed them to improve. All right, so before we go on, does anybody have any questions about that so far? Okay. Well, we struggled a little bit too. So in a previous slide, I mentioned that standards 8.1, 8.2, and 8.9 were widely met. These are the standards that primarily have to do with fiscal oversight and audits. Here, these are the ones that we didn't meet. most of these were around the notification of the availability of the audit. For publics, this really came down to being able to document that standard in meeting minutes. In some cases, again, there just wasn't anything uploaded to the folder, and I had to mark it as unmet, even if the notifications went out. If those notices aren't referenced in a meeting or meeting minutes or in an email that can be showing the notification, I have to mark it as unmet every time. For privates, just being able to show that the agency even solicited bids for an audit seemed to be a sticking point here. That's 8.5. I would reference private agencies to keep engagement letters or RFPs or however other ways that your agency used to follow the federal guidelines around procurement steps. In almost every case, an audit, a circular audit, is going to fall under a micro purchase threshold of $10,000 or up to $50,000 if an agency self-certified a threshold this high and does it on an annual basis. But if you do self-certify up to this amount, you've got to document and make that available to auditors or the pass-through agency like the state office. If you want to do this and need help, just reach out to me and I'll help you walk through that. But let's talk more about the standards and how that works with the Wyoming Department of Health and their own specific requirements around audits and financial reviews. I'm going to draw your attention to policy that was made in 2019. It's policy number 10 in the CSBG policy manual. The Wyoming Department of Health Fiscal Department does allow for an agency to ask for an exemption to their fiscal policy around audits and reviews. I should be showing you that policy right now, but basically the policy says if you expend, and remember the key word here is expend $700,000 or $50,000 or more, you automatically have to go into a single audit. If you spend less than that, there are different tiers, but at some point, the Wyoming Department of Health is going to ask even small agencies that you still have to have an audit. And if I don't want to commit to this, but I think it's every 5 years. They do allow for agencies to ask for an exemption to that fiscal policy around audits and reviews, and that would have to be addressed on a case-by-case basis in conjunction with the state CSP office and how they want to use that exception in meeting audit requirements. So the policy goes on to state, and this I am reading from, that the department reserves the right to delay or temporarily exempt a subrecipient from the policy in the event of it. You're a startup, the size of your agency is really, really small, or if it causes another hardship or unforeseen reason, and if it's in the best interest of the Wyoming Department of Health and the subrecipient to do so. Now, this request has to be made in writing, and you have to be able to show proof of the Department of Health Fiscal's decision of concurrence on that decision. Please note that the department also says that an audit expense may be included in your indirect cost pool in a cost allocation plan. And we can talk about those later on an individual basis. But I do want to draw your attention to standard 8.8. This one was missed, I think, almost 100%. The state uses the measurement tool that the state uses is a certificate of good standing from Workforce Services as the indicator of the standard. The link to this is in the slide. I will make sure that you get those. Because you need to have that certificate that shows you are both current and in good standing around your unemployment insurance and workers' compensation. Now, the standard says payroll withholdings, but Wyoming has said, you know what, if you are current with your payroll withholdings, you're going to be in good standing with Workforce Services. However, if you are an agency that doesn't have more than 3 employees, you're exempt from these. So it's really hard to show that you have a certificate of good standing from Workforce Services if you're exempt from paying unemployment insurance and workers' compensation. So you have two options. You can go work with Workforce Services to get registered, get the exemption letter, then you can still get your certificate of good standing. Or you can just go to show your bookkeeping software, go to QuickBooks, go to your IRS portal, and your bank statement shows that your payments were made. It's easier to get a certificate of good standing from the state, but again, that's not going to be available for everybody. Now for the not so great news. Ugh, we really struggled here. So these two particular standards are really important. So meeting organizational standard 1.3 is super hard because there are three pieces to this standard. And I had to mark everybody for the most part. I think there might have been one or two agencies that I was able to say met this, but you have to be able to meet all three standards, right? So it reinforces the agency's accountability to the people that you serve. It ensures that programs are being improved, you're on a continuous improvement process, and it's really based on community feedback. This standard ensures that community action agencies remain client-centered because it shows that we're actively listening to our customer voices and using that input to drive decision making and making service improvements, because we have to systematically collect, analyze, and report the data. So how does that look? A tripartite board can make informed strategic decisions that reflect the lived experiences of those affected by poverty. It builds trust, transparency within the community by demonstrating that the agency is responsive and willing to adapt based on client needs. And it also strengthens an agency's ability to evaluate effective services and make data-informed improvements, which is what we're asking to do. So even if your customer feedback is gathered through a more broad local government process, you publics, think housing surveys, customer surveys that your utilities department might send out to see how people are responding to those. You can use those. We just hope that you can find a way to align it to CSBG expectations to ensure that the agency is not just compliant, but also learning and improving in partnership with the community. Now, standard 6.4, we didn't see a lot of compliance around this, and I think this is really has more to do around the moratorium on community needs assessments, because what this standard asks is that we're using customer satisfaction and input, that we're not just collecting it, but we're actually using it to shape the agency's priorities, goals, and investments during the strategic planning process. And so a lot of times where we try to do this is in our community needs assessments around our qualitative data. And this can be community conversations, feedback from our people with lived experience. And we use and show that being used in our strategic planning. So an example of this was when I came over to Gillette a couple of years ago to do, oh, maybe it was just last year, to do the strategic planning for the CARES board. And we use survey information from our subrecipients and for the people that we served. And we said, what are we missing? What do we need to do that is improving and looking towards continuous improvement? And we used that information in our strategic plan, and we were able to document it. So that really helps us build and show that authentic community engagement, showing customers that their input really has influence, that the agency is responsive, that we're equitable, and that we're keeping their needs relevant, especially now during changing social and economic environments. So these things are really, it's hard to do, it's hard to document, it's a super intentional process. And so we just want to make sure that those two particular standards are something that we're going to focus on in improving our organizational standard across the Wyoming network. So what do we do to fix it? So for standard 1.3, around customer surveys, At this particular time, the state office is really recommending that all agencies who are looking at creating or revamping any policy around customer services hold off just a minute. Once our new Empower software system is up and running, it has a survey capability piece to it. And once we know a little bit more about that and how we can deploy it, just hold off on changing anything. But typically, in my experience, it's not the the problem is typically not that the survey isn't used. Again, it's that it's a three-part standard, and having all of the components need to be included in your supporting documentation. So we want to make sure that we have a systemic approach, meaning that you have policy and procedure outlining exactly what this process is going to look like around collecting, analyzing, and reporting. This is all qualitative data. It's critical to the meeting of not just the letter of the standard, but really the intent of that. So we are looking at some different ways that we're going to be able to work with the network to better meet this. Um, I listed a couple of the things here, but one of the ones that Joe and I in particular are really interested in and working on is the Wyoming Data Manual that will be coming in fiscal year 26. This will be a fully developed, on-demand, self-paced course that your staff, your subrecipients, everybody will be able to take to really develop a healthy data culture in their agencies. So we're really going to be working at that and what that looks like. We also want to be able to look at 6.4, which is our strategic plan. There's a lot of different ways that customer feedback can be incorporated and shown in your community planning processes. So for those agencies right now that are looking at community needs, make sure that you're communicating with your vendor about how important it is that the client's voice be heard in determining the priorities of the care board or the agency or uh, family promises. Make sure that that is one step in your assessments that's going to really feed information to your planning process. Now, currently the state office is looking at ways for agencies to incorporate that feedback again into the annual application process, which is just one more standard that will be included early in the process. So for example, if they build customer feedback information into the standard, you will be able to use that to meet the standard in the community action plan. All right, we're almost done here. Uh, the goal here earlier, I mentioned that I'm going to be sharing this slide deck with you so that you're able to have all of these resources for yourself to refer back to and decide what is the best way forward for your agency. CSNO is also really committed to bringing you more self-directed and on-demand training around surveys and best practices around meeting this. So on this list, there is a huge, I'm telling you, a great amount of resources that will help your agencies in meeting these. We also look at ways that you can meet the standard is simple customer surveys, leveraging your feedback channels that already exist, right? Maybe you can use data from case notes, complaint logs, exit interviews, existing partner surveys. If you're part of a city or a county with a customer feedback system, document how that data applies to your CSBG clients. Develop a one-page summary report, putting templates together to be able to share with your board quarterly or biannually, including things like your findings, customer quotes, suggested actions. Use visuals like charts or word clouds to keep it engaging and clear. We want to look at ways that we can build feedback into our client touch points. So like ask your case managers or your intake staff to include feedback questions as part of their closing script as of like example. Is there anything we could have done better today for you? And these can be noted in client files or tracked in a spreadsheet. And then engaging the board, including customer satisfaction as a standing agenda item for the tripartite board or program committees goes so far in being able to document this in your meeting minutes. Consider a brief, maybe like customer voice spotlight with real stories or quotes at every meeting. And then automate this whenever you can. Like I said, Empower is going to have the ability for us to use customer survey data, use intakes, use your appointment software to trigger feedback requests after services. And a lot of these systems, like Empower, are going to be able to compile this data automatically, reducing the manual labor that goes along with it. And then consider using group feedback sessions, host listening sessions, or focus groups quarterly. These can be more dynamic than surveys and sometimes often yield richer feedback. And then again, keep these minutes and summarize these themes for reporting to the board on that. For 6.4, here are a lot of resources that are going to be available for you. Some ideas that you can use to meet this standard again is creating that dashboard or report, collecting that customer input, and then create a simple report. Share it with the planning team and the board for reference as you're going through your community action plan or through the strategic planning process. Make sure you're using actual comments from clients whenever possible to humanize that data. Remember, we talk about numbers are not great by themselves. You always need to put faces or humanize that data to make sure that you're demonstrating that lived experience. Include a section in your strategic plan titled What We Heard. Make your customer input visible by summarizing how feedback informed each one of the strategic goal that you set in your strategic plan. Time your community assessment calendars so that your customer input is fresh and directly available when your planning cycle begins. Use your strategic planning surveys to ask forward looking questions. What programs or services would make a biggest difference in your household over the next 3 years? An important note here, there are several different types of clients or customers that we're working with. One of them are the direct service clients that we work with, but don't overlook the fact that your staff and volunteers are also customers whose input is really important to strategic planning, as well as the input from your community partners. Those are other clients that you can survey to make sure that you are getting a wide-rounded or a well-rounded source of information around qualitative data. And finally, why not ask clients or customers to be planning partners with you? Invite former clients, invite community representatives to join your strategic planning committees or focus groups. All right. So does anybody have any suggestions that you guys do to make life easier around your organizational standards? No? Okay. So some tips before I end this session. Gather your supporting documents as they occur. You got a board meeting? Great. Make a copy and drop them in a folder so it's easy for you to be able to find it when it's time to upload those, right? You want to, oh, and a note about the portal. Don't upload your standards early until the state office tells you it's time to update them. Establish board meeting templates that show when a standard is being met. I've got lots and lots of great examples of meeting templates that you can use to show a very clear way that the standard is being met. And utilize that calendar that's provided to you by the state office and the CSNO offices, those calendars that I referenced earlier in the presentation, and add them have them hanging on your wall. You can find that calendar in the portal. It's the timeline that CSBG state office is looking at. And then I also found in the portal documents named the calendar of board actions that tells you exactly what your board needs to be discussing and when. And all of these calendars are really useful when planning your board schedules. And they can be found in the EE resources tab on the CSBG portal. So that is organizational standards 2025. What can you guys look forward to moving forward? I am going to be creating a lot of training materials and toolkits to help you better prepare for organizational standards, particularly around those standards where we kind of struggled a little bit. Again, I will send this out to you guys so you have all of the links available to you. But before we end, I wanted to just give you guys that last chance to ask any questions that you might have and see if there's anything else that I can do for you or the state off or the state association can do for you. Since we have Joe here, if you have questions about community needs assessments, might be a good time to ask Joe some of those questions. Joe, since I have you here, you often use qualitative data in your community needs assessments to really determine information. Is that something that you always did, or is that something that's specific to CSBG?
Oh, I think we always need to know what people need in their community. So we've always tried to do at least focus groups, if not a survey that we can then replicate in other communities. But I'll tell you what, those two problems that you're talking about, getting citizen input on what their needs are, and then getting customer satisfaction information is important, obviously. But we've got a couple of problems. One, nobody likes to say they're needy, and so they oftentimes won't respond to a public survey. Two, we oftentimes have a very compressed amount of time to do these assessments, and nobody likes to be pressed to, identify everything that's been going on, or maybe can't even remember what they've been doing the last 3 years. And so, to address that, we're going to keep doing those things, but we're starting to think we need a statewide survey. So I'm excited to see what Empower is going to be doing there. And beyond that, we're starting to dig into a couple of other sources of input. One is getting the data from, for example, from Wyoming 211. People call and say, "Hey, I need help today." And we can track that and analyze that by county and over time to see what trends are. And the other one that we're just starting to dig into now is to start looking at some of the health related social needs that hospital and healthcare providers are starting to screen for, the so called SDOH screens, because those are standardized and yet they're done on a real time basis. And again, that's something that we could get comparative data across different jurisdictions. And so I don't have a magic wand, but I'll tell you, we're looking real hard at some ways to address these same issues because it it's everything. We need to address what the real needs are instead of speculating. And then we need to know, did we do a good job? And quite frankly, we need to be able to answer the question, what'd you do with my money? Did you get a big bang for the buck?
That
That's a critical
that's
question, whether we're
huge.
talking about tax dollars or donated money.
That is huge. And those are the conversations that we're having at the federal level, is because a lot of CSVG is unique in the fact that we do focus on outcomes, but a lot of federal programs do not. They talk about how many pounds of food went out the door,
Output.
how many hours, they look at their outputs. And what's really important is outcomes. What changed? Because of the work that you did. And that is where we start seeing forward movement. And that's critical not only to community action, but it's a founding principle of the Roma Foundation, right? The performance management is, how well did we do? Did we do what we thought we were going to do? And where do we need to adjust? And we do that through healthy data cultures. And so Joe and I are going to be teaming up and we're going to be doing a lot of training around data and how you guys can improve or create, in some cases, create a data culture in your agency. And we all collect data. We collect so much data. Where we miss the mark a little bit is using the data to inform where we're going. And really a passion of mine is those gaps. Who are we not reaching? And those questions are so critical as we're going through and talking to our communities. So we're going to be talking about that a lot, getting you guys ready for fiscal year 26 and having those resources available for you. All right, we've got 3 minutes left. I wanted to give you guys an opportunity to ask any final questions that you might have. I know that Linda had to take off. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.